All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're at 9 o'clock. It's sure good to be together with those of you who are here with us in person and all of you who've taken your time to join us online today. We'll go ahead and get started. The quote that I have is from a football coach that if you're in my demographic, you would recognize him pretty easily. Last coach to win a national championship with Notre Dame. Notre Dame fan, you also would recognize him very well. And this is one of the quotes that I'd like from him, that I never learn anything talking. I only learn things when I ask questions. I think we know this is true as we work with our students. We want them to ask questions through their learning process. And sometimes we forget that about ourselves as adult learners. The other reason this relates to our meeting today is there are several places that I'll be asking questions in relation to some of the topics that I'm interested in learning more about, the solutions, potential solutions for these challenges that have been highlighted in an audit that we'll spend some time talking about. Okay, next slide. I tried to build into our meeting a cadence of updating this group about activities related to our board. Put these slides together towards the end of last week, and Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools Incentive Program, I believe, was redirected to committee, trying to bring clarification into that program about how much time a student or a teacher needs to be working during that year to qualify for that incentive program. So that one has not been completed. The APAC policy 5002 was completed, and it made a change. There was a group, the Utah Association of Assessment Directors, who are with us. Many of you are with us today from that group. Had requested representation on that committee, one of the existing slots. In committee, it was recommended that they'd be a member of the UAD be appointed as a non-voting member. In full board meeting, that changed, and there'll be a designated spot for a member of the UAD Association. The board will still appoint, but the Utah Association of Assessment Directors would have a voice in who are for that particular spot. And then our private school, homeschool, Bureau of Indian Education participation. That's just an effort to try to make clarity around the Utah Fits All Scholarship students, because there are some restrictions on assessment data related to that particular group of students. And so that's why that policy was before the board. As we talk about what's coming up with the board on our next slide, working on the Acadience reading contract, and Sid may talk about that. As we both on the reading would be Sid, and then we also have a contract amendment that will maybe come up in our audit discussion. And then Senate Bill 257 last year requires the state board, or creates an expectation that the state board will submit a waiver request for our Utah Consolidated application. Some of you may have noticed the press release because we're in the public comment period of that. That's a requirement of any kind of waiver. And then we'll consult with the governor's office, and we expect that to go before the board in November. Very unlikely that waiver request would be accepted by the U.S. Department of Education. There's no record of any kind of waiver like that. What it essentially would do would, if granted, would allow the state of Utah to exempt schools from full accountability if they have a parental exclusion rate of 50% or higher. We'll keep you posted on that, but we expect it to go before the board next month. So the data reliability audit, we'll probably spend 20 to 25 minutes this first part of our meeting talking about this audit. That's a hot link, I believe, to the audit itself. There are some recommendations in that audit, all of which are related to assessment, state assessment systems. And we're going to talk about some of those, and I'm seeking input. This is the motion that came out of the board when the audit was reported. It's an internal audit. It's the group that did this, who performed this audit, and they recommended that the APAC Association or the APAC group review those recommendations and then bring recommendations forward to the full board if there are any. So on an audit, for those of you who may not have been involved in audits before, count yourself lucky. They take a good commitment of time and energy, but recommendations that are made by whichever entity performs the audit are just that. They're recommendations, or some audits will use the term findings. And then it's up to the entity that the audit was conducted on to determine whether they agree with those recommendations and then what subsequent actions could be taken. Sometimes an audit will have recommendations that the governing group over that institution will just say, we recognize there's some risks there and we accept those. Those are within our range of tolerance. And other times those recommendations will come back and the group that has been audited will say, okay, we agree with the recommendation and here's what we're going to do to rectify it or to mitigate the risk. So what we're doing today is a pre-step before the Assessment and Accountability Policy Advisory Committee meets next Wednesday afternoon. And I plan to synthesize the information we get from our larger assessment directors group and use that to inform this smaller group that's designed and the purpose of bringing policy recommendations forward to our board. So that's why it's important for me to get feedback regarding some of these questions and topics that come forward through this audit. Let's go to
What Darren's also trying to say is please join the Nearpod. We've been putting the link in the chat. We only have about 36 people in the Nearpod right now. I don't know how many people are joining, but we really do need this information in there.
Thank you, Kim. Let's go to the next slide. The audit, this will give some of you who aren't logged into the Nearpod some time to do so. The audit was a fairly narrow scope of assessments. It wasn't full a quiver of statewide assessments. You'll see here it was the Acadians reading and math they prioritized, the kindergarten exit entry profile, the WIDA, and Utah Aspire Plus. And you'll notice in the audit, Utah Aspire Plus isn't called out really in any way. Other than as we talk about retention records at the end of the audit, obviously affects that as well as other assessments that aren't on here. KEEP, our board at the most recent meeting or previously decided that KEEP would no longer be after this year, no longer be a statewide assessment. So we're not going to address the recommendation specific to KEEP in here, but you'll notice as we talk about manual scoring and challenges with manual scoring and manual data entry on state assessments that audit calls out, KEEP would have been part of that because of the scoring that's done by either the teacher or the testing team member. And then their efforts to then put that into an electronic system in the room and the possibilities it creates for error. That's the scope of what we'll be talking about today. And again, some of the recommendations and potential actions would expand beyond just these assessments. 5. Okay, next slide. So the first part of their audit was looking at system-to-system transfer of data. So once data is taken from a student who's completed an assessment, whether that's manually taken and then entered into a digital platform and then transferred through the process to end up eventually in your Tableau Surf file or on the data gateway, that they've found that that's highly reliable, though not perfect, which again, I would be stunned if there's any system that manages that volume of records that has that much variety in how it's input into the system and transfer steps. It was 100% perfect. On average, the error rate was a fraction of 1%. So, and there weren't any specific recommendations around that component of their audit. Let's go to the next slide. Might be a question then. So we're going to get to, and I might have got these out of order, but we're going to talk about manual scored assessments because the audit calls that out and makes a recommendation that the state board tried to reduce the number of assessments that require manual scoring, or there could be other actions that we take to improve the reliability. So what actions, from your perspective as assessment directors, what actions can be taken to reduce risk of manually scored state assessments? So again, on the one end of the continuum would be don't have any. And our response to them was that's extremely expensive. And I don't know that the industry could support that there's vendors for all of our needs that could support fully automated testing for students without a human being to interact with them. So that's one end of the continuum. The other end might just be, well, we've got what we like. From your perspective, how could we improve reliability of scoring in that? Might be something like, well, the trainings probably could be better. Everybody wants to do a better job. It might be, well, we just need more people because they just get so stretched that and competing demands on their time. And anywhere in between or other thoughts that you have, we would love to receive those. I'll wait for a minute, and then I might ask if we see some up here. I'd ask for some of you to comment on your recommendation.
Remember, if you agree, you don't have adding the same comment over and over. You can just click on the heart.
Good luck. Yeah.
Or you can also add a comment below what somebody else has added as well.
Two major themes are showing up with the training and then a testing team. Some of you who don't use testing teams might have concerns with that one if it was a requirement the state board put in place. And I'm not suggesting that that's what they would do, but auditors, one of the things they like to talk about is internal controls, which includes usually a heavy presence of monitoring comes into play. So from finances, you'll see with the financial systems, there's a lot more monitoring into play that can lead to improved practices that also can lead to corrective action and other things that our assessment community, we haven't typically been in that domain or that bucket where the state has come in a monitoring capacity with the purpose of trying to enforce certain actions, right? Okay. Thank you. We've got quite a few of you who've made comments, and we look at the hearts. We can't see them all. I'm wondering, okay.
Al is asking what state assessments must be hand scored.
No, the audit again, Hal, just focus primarily on our Acadience reading and math benchmark system, and the key would be the ones that are hand scored. I don't believe WIDA has hand scoring components. Just the screener, home language. There's some human errors there or issues there.
You don't count.
I don't know if that answers your question exactly, Hal, but for this audit and our discussion purposes today, it's really focused around the Acadience benchmark assessments. Now that the KEEP after this year will no longer be required state assessment.
One thing though, there is the writing and speaking, final scoring. The reading.
Thank you. And interesting, we'll get into WIDA pretty heavily. Interestingly, with the WIDA, the issues or concerns they found with WIDA weren't related to that topic. It was other things. So let me just scroll here. And if there's anyone online with the meeting or in person that would like to ask a clarifying question about any of the suggestions that have come up, feel free to do so as I read. Now, the question about the cost, again, that's unknown to us. Not only cost, we are in an RFP cycle right now for the reading. I don't believe any of the vendors had a fully automated scoring system. Did they? I need to get closer. Okay.
Karen's a soft talker.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's a few of you that do believe state assessment should be auto scored only. Lots of you believe in using teams, and then also improving and enhancing the training component for those who do the scoring and data entry. Okay, thank you. And so, yeah, this is the comment or some of the language from the audit that spurred that question for keeping Acadience reading and math. Data may be invalid when manual operations are required. And that's the language from the audit itself. again, on our response as an agency, we talked about that there's always measurement error. And so to say an instrument's completely invalid, we have our response in the audit to that. What they're really saying is that there's a measurement error or scoring error, and is it within an acceptable range or not? And they're just pointing out that they believe it could be mitigated or reduced if we had automated scoring. Whether that's true or not, that might be more perception than else. But okay, next slide. So WIDA assessment scores in validity. WIDA data within the USB system has significant inaccuracies, and this interestingly isn't really talking about the WIDA scores. We'll get into the identification of students here in a minute. They identified of their sampling, remembering that an audit doesn't look at the full data set. It goes out, does a sampling process, and then takes those results from the sampling and applies them across the full system and says it's probably, we're pretty confident that we'd see this across the full system if we included the full data set. But 12% of students with an identified native or parent language other than English did not have an appropriate limited English designation. And I think the next slide will show a sample from a single student that the audit found. And they use this as just an example or a case study of one of the 12% of errors. So this individual student was enrolled in 3 different LEAs, and you'll see in grade 0, kindergarten, when they enrolled, whether they were identified as limited English, and then if they had an access test or not. LA2, so LEA2, they were in that same school until 5th grade. They moved to in 5th grade to another LEA. No action was taken regarding their language. LEA3 in 8th grade, they don't have a limited English designation, but they were administered the access that year and their native language was identified. Student then in that same LEA went to a different school, so went to the junior high school or high school, depending on the configuration. That school then identified him as a yes for limited English, did not administer an access test that year. And then in the grade 10, which was that same LEA, and you'll see they finished out. So that designation of limited English maintained until 12th grade when they were identified as fluent. But interestingly, you see in grade 10, they scored a 5.3, which at that time would have qualified them as exiting, as being fluent. They'd been monitoring status, but so the audit identified, I'd say if the full audit, if there was one primary concern, my opinion would be this would be the topic that was the most highlighted and as the most substantial evidence around, boy, something needs to be done to improve some of the practices across our state when identifying students, administering the right screener test, and then following through with their access tests. Okay, next slide. I think we'll have a question here. And I know that most of you, some of you are also the multi-language learner director in your LEA, but many of you are not. So I'm asking again for your perspective of if you're function as an assessment director only and don't have multiple duties related to multi-language students, still provide your thoughts and ideas here. What actions can be taken to improve the accuracy of identifying and recording students with an identified native or parent language other than English in our schools?
And again, we have about 94 people in Zoom. So we'd really like, and this is the simplest way for us to compile the data, considering that APAC is next week. So that would be lovely.
Many of you may have systems you've built out in your own education communities where you don't see these kind of, the example that we just showed, that individual student, where you've got internal controls and some structures that you can, with high confidence, believe that you don't have situations like that. And we'd love to hear the processes you put in place to make sure that that happens.
Directors.
Yes. In fact, they may have already been. I don't know. Megan, not yet. So refining the home language survey, that's interesting because I believe, Megan, there's been some action done just since or about overlapping the audit where the home language survey has been modified and changed. A couple of comments, but multiple people indicating challenges with parents making decisions or not understanding. Again, our responsibility then is what could we do to try to overcome those challenges?
Encourage you to reach out to us so we can provide full assistance in those.
You can come on up here by me, Megan.
Apparently I hate them. We would encourage you to reach out to myself and Ann Michelle Neal. This is Megan Lopez. And we can provide technical assistance and good talking points. We are working on even more guidance that's in draft format right now to address some of these unique situations that are coming up. So even before the audit came out, we've been trying and working on improving the systems to support you as LEAs. But when parents, you know, and we get it. It's a hard situation where you can opt out of services, but not a test. And so that's a tricky conversation to have. And let us know how we can support you in those conversations, because it does require, you know, crucial conversations, safe and open conversations, but also where considering language might be a barrier in those conversations with the parents and guardians. So what do we as LEAs have to do in those situations legally to provide that communication with those parents, but also what are those talking points and what can they be? And really truly understanding the civil rights implications of the students that are directly tied to access testing, and also understanding the assets and the benefits connected to this test. So again, just reach out, because we want to be a part of that support in bringing these conversations to life with those parents, those guardians in that community. And I also know I'm going to forget the bill, but HB ends in a 7. But it goes with the ELL software grant. Part of the amendments to that bill require LEAs to have solid communication plans. You can discuss part of that with Amber Wright. She is our ELL software grant specialist. But we would also very much like to support you in how do you create those communication plans, what's required, and how can we include assessment in those discussions and in that communication plan. So again, we're working internally as much as we possibly can. Ann Michelle and I have been going to all the meetings, curriculum directors, the ALS directors, the software providers here, literacy directors. We're trying to get the word out as much as possible. And we're hoping everything trickles down to all the people in the districts, but just send us an email, and it's never a bother. You hear me say it all the time, but it's never a bother because we want to help.
Stay here for just 1 second.
Okay.
Kim, can you scroll up just a bit? The comment that I wanted to. Oh, yeah, right there. Emily's scrolling. Okay.
Somebody has to
She's
do it.
multitasking. Okay. This comment here that 3 people like, we're finding that parents are still putting English on the home survey, even if that isn't correct, and teachers are later turning in students' names as being but the home language survey is the trigger, and it's a document that is the parent's responsibility to fill out. I think I can't remember all the details from the audit, but so an auditors, they come in from the back end, and they don't look to see if the parents' home language is different. They look at the documentation and then what happened after that documentation. So if the home language survey is completed, the audit, they just come in and say, okay, this should have triggered the screener test. This should have triggered the access. And are we consistently following this? I think when we talk about that home language survey, as challenging as it can be for us to sit, or a registrar to sit across the desk from someone and they say they're English speaking and they can barely communicate, we don't have the authority to change that home language survey.
Nope.
That's their right. And what they put on there, then we followed the actions related to that going forward.
Yeah.
Correct?
So we need to honor what the parents put on the home language survey. And teachers cannot be a source of referring students to screening. That's just not allowed at all. So teachers can bring up concerns. If there are concerns, again, you can always pursue safe, open conversations. We're here to provide assistance in how to have those conversations again with parents where you do think teachers think there might be a language barrier, an academic English language barrier. We might want to have conversations with the family to understand why did they put English only. But I will tell you, a lot of times things can be surprising. Right? We don't know all the ins and outs of the home situation. Sometimes students switch their living situations from year to year. Things happen in families, and we really don't know until we have those conversations. But in the end, we cannot ask parents or families or guardians to change what they put on that home language survey. We can't hint at it. We can't coerce them in any way to make those changes. They can know it's an option if they choose to change it and update it, but ultimately the decision has to be up to the parents and the guardians. If they electively choose to update that home language survey, which would then trigger a screener, and then that actually determines whether or not the student qualifies for language services and can be considered EL. That can take place, but it has to be the parent's choice.
And Michelle, did you come up? You had
Yeah.
step up here too.
Yeah, I'm going to put on my Title III hat from many years ago for a moment. And this is something that I used to say all the time and haven't said in a long time, so I'm going to say it again. Learning English is not a disability. Being an English language learner is not a disability. It is an asset. So I want to empower teachers to use the tools that they have, the good strategies that they know, multi-tiered systems of support, to implement interventions that the student needs in the classroom. These things can be done in these circumstances. And I just want to give that power back to educators.
Got a question?
In the chat, Kimmy is asking, so what happens if the parents change their responses the next year for the same student or already qualified as an English
Oh, that happens all the time. And we even see like a sibling has one, set of answers, and then the younger sibling has another set of answers. That happens all the time. Again, we're working on very specific guidance, but you can discuss the situation with the family. Again, you don't know if that student's family, home life changed from that year to the next year. You can pursue safe, open conversations. But again, ultimately, it is the family that gets to decide what's going to be on that home language survey. But they do need to know, in the case of a student that's already been screened, identified, and qualified for language services, that student is EL, right? So that student is still identified, and letting them know through the annual notification letter, which has also been updated. It is available on the Title III website under the Forms tab, that we notice that you put all English. We want to understand the home situation, but we also want to let you know previously this student had been identified, so they do still qualify and are legally entitled to these services. And always document everything. And again, reach out to us because there's always going to be one unique thing about each situation that might change our response just a little bit. So we would love to be involved in that support, and how do we really know what's going to be correct for this student and the family. And honestly, there are instances where it was like, hey, there was a mistake made on the previous home language survey. So then what do we do?
Another question, I think you already answered this, but Rachel asked, so we cannot screen even if it's first for a screening in order to help.
Yep, you can't.
Yeah, that doesn't, so what I heard Megan saying though, or Aunt Michelle actually, was one of her main themes is, even if they're not identified as a multilingual, multilanguage learner, through the official process as a teacher, the scaffolding and accommodations you provide in the classroom can still be targeted towards their language needs.
Correct. And the other thing I would bring up in regards to home language surveys is that many years ago, like 5, registration was on paper, and students only filled out registration forms one time, and screening was only given one time. And now that there's online registration, and I know for my own child that I see the home language questions every year, that is not how the original law and processes were intended to function. They were intended to function under a system where the home language survey is given one time when the student first enrolls. And so I think from our perspective, we are looking at that first home language survey as the one that determines screener. Megan brings up some good points that there may be nuances if the student's home situation changes, but that would be the only case when you would probably go back and revisit the home language survey and the screener.
And LEAs and LEAs have actually just this week reached out saying, do we have to administer the home language survey every year? No, it's actually preferable that it's only done once upon registration for that LEA. When they switch LEAs, please do. Another thing that we have been finding a lot though is that a lot of LEAs aren't going to the data gateway to look up the student's assessment records, which let us know, has the student been taking access in the past? What does that tell us, right? So when a student moves from LEA to LEA, I look at that home language survey and I see, oh, there's another language listed on one of these questions. If I go to the data gateway and I see this student has a history of access scores, I don't need to screen that student again, right? I already know they've been screened, they've been qualified, and I have their most recent access scores to let me know, has the student been exited and then are in monitoring, or are they still a current EL?
And there have been a number of comments on the collaborative board about the student backpack that's happening. And this is one of the categories that will be following the student. So in the future, but not right now.
And I see that the one I'm looking at has 11 likes. So we have at least 12 people that are commenting on that one comment. The other thing I wanted to call out here is I like the one on here. I like them all. I like your taking your energy and time to give us feedback. But this one that says, we have been a lot more accurate by combining efforts of the assessment, Title III, and educational equity departments. Adding more people has greatly helped. I read that. It made me think of our Making Connections meeting. That's part of the purpose, is try to get people communicating better across departments. Because probably many of you who are with us today are thinking, why are we spending time on this? This isn't my world. But there's interrelation to assessment.
It's your world now.
Where it crosses over. Thank you, Megan.
Yeah. Just again, reach out. We're happy to help, and I don't want to give away anything because I don't want to make false promises that might not come true, but we are really working hard internally on getting things in place to make your lives easier in relation to all of this. I'm pointing to things and no one can see me online, but
Okay.
we're trying.
I've had my hand up for a while, but I don't know if you guys see it. So I decided I could unmute real quick. We use the data gateway. It would be so wonderful if there was a report that we could pull up everyone who's had a screener that's in our school. And it just, because I just find them, just that miscommunication or the parent changes. My other question is though, what about, so here's the problem is, as a school's accountability, once they have a WIDA score, they cannot exit until they show proficiency. But if a parent has made a mistake or done something, how do we remove that student out of the accountability?
Contact us and we'll walk you through the steps.
So
We
you
just-
can remove them?
They can be removed if they were erroneously identified as EL. Yes.
What if they just switch then and they come to your school and no, we're not ELA. So once they're identified, like they can't opt out of that test. And so
If through investigation and going through conversations and everything, and again, with our assistance, because every situation is unique, if it is found that the student was erroneously identified, there are things that you can do to have that student no longer be identified, not marked, not counting for accountability. But if we find like, no, this student was actually identified correctly and the parents are just like, we don't want to do this anymore, right? Then there are other steps and processes and conversations that do need to take place.
okay.
This makes me think, I'm going to walk out into the weeds and just share a personal story on this topic. When I worked in a previous district and I was made the assessment director, I'd learned that just that comment that I just heard, you can't opt out of this test. It's a civil rights issue. So I started to enforce that across our district. And at the middle school, so we had a student who had, unknown to him or his parents, been flagged as EL in the system based on his last name. So the home language survey, when I pulled up to investigate this, because I got the referral because she was very angry. Like I got the angriest person to come in the district office that week. That was her. And she was justifiably upset because she wanted to know why her son was going to have to take this test. Doesn't speak Spanish. She has a Spanish look to her, but she doesn't speak Spanish. She's English only, and her husband's English only speaker. I had been the elementary principal for this family, so fortunately that helped me work with her and help her to calm down so we could work through and make it not feel so personal to her that her son had been targeted in her language and based on his last name. But the home language survey that had been completed was didn't indicate anything. Several years went by, student goes to the intermediate school. I'm assuming a teacher had said the student needs to be EL. They got flagged. No testing was done for the student because he wasn't EL. Then I run the list and say all these kids need to be tested. And when he got to get tested, he's like, "Wait a minute, I don't speak any language other than English." So that can happen. In that case study we just saw, when I read that with that individual student, I recognized how easy that is to occur. There's lots of variables, and I understand the parents' hesitation to fill out the forms right. But really, once we identify, we just got to make sure that the identification process, we follow that process as tightly as possible. And this idea of referring people or classifying them without going through the right screening process is really what the auditors are talking about. We were able to get that student exited out. Wasn't counted, it didn't impact their school accountability. And I think at that time we had 2 report cards, maybe 3, Safar, PACE, and some other, the governor's report card. Do you remember those days? I can appreciate that. Thank you so much. This is helpful. And again, my goal is to synthesize some of this information, the information you provided, and share that with the groups that will help make recommendations to our board about whether they should take additional policy-related actions going forward. All right, next slide. Some concerns regarding how LEAs implement assessments were identified, including lack of fidelity with the state testing plans submitted to the USBE and non-compliance with proctoring and parental requirements. So let's go to the question that's related to this one. Again, there's more detail in the audit itself. The word "some" is kind of vague, right? That's the part that I didn't like, but it does provide a little more definition in there. So the first question, we'll get to the proctoring in a minute. What actions could be taken to increase the fidelity of LEA assessment plans required each year? The vast majority of LEAs submit their plans on time. You'll see this in the audit. the vast majority submit their plans completely and on time. There are some exceptions. There's some that don't submit it on time. There's some that submit it, but the auditors determined there wasn't much thought. They just took a beginning window, end window. They made some inferences about quality of those plans. Great, thank you. And remember, the plan is submitting the plan is one step. Implementing the plan is really the key, and that's what the auditors are looking at when they went out and they're sampling. They compare what the plan said to what the LEA did with the components of the plan.
11 LEAs missed the deadline after we had 7 of them submit following week.
I can tell you, I have had a board member asking me what would happen if the plan requirement went away. Because we have at the State Board of Reports and Requirements Task Force, it's been working for more than a year, and their primary goal is reduce burden on LEAs. So everything that, every rule that goes before the board that gets filtered with, does this create a burden for the LEA, anybody at the LEA, and if so, is it necessary? So there are questions right now, actually, from at least one board member of, what would happen if we eliminated the requirement for an assessment plan? From an audit perspective, it would be something they didn't audit and there would be no findings. From, at least on the plan, from proctoring, data reliability, those kind of things. Training is part of the plan, and we saw training was brought up on one of our first boards. So yeah, if you feel like the plan is not helpful for you as an LEA assessment director in meeting the requirements, you can put those thoughts down as well.
I can tell you the reason why the professional development questions are, every question on the survey is required by the state code. So there's a reason why the professional development questions are in there, and when you're providing training and when they're, if you actually go to the rule, all of those things are required as part of the testing plan. That's why the questions are there. Those aren't optional, so.
Like the most popular comment there is about a feeling of some redundancy. And I think that overlaps with the comment about our training dates are often school specific and ongoing throughout the year. There isn't a place in the plan to identify what we really do. That and redundancy, while they're not the same, they seem to have the same flavor. The plan isn't as valuable because the plan should be valuable to you as an LEA in implementing the requirements. A few of you who are feeling like the plan is very helpful. Wait for just another. Okay. All right, let's move to the next one. All right, varying interpretations regarding duties of proctors, conflicting requirements in Utah Code and Board Rule, non-comprehensive and late assessment plans, and a lack of monitoring compliance with the Board Rule requirements. This is language that comes from the audit. Let's go to the next question, which I think has to do with proctoring. Oh, okay. So that one will be coming up. What actions could be taken to ensure our community is compliant with Utah Code and Board Rule assessment and accountability requirements? It's pretty broad. Remembering the audit was specific to those 4 assessments, but this is an area where it gets a little broader. The recommendations seem to go beyond just those assessments. And this might be an area that we feel like no additional action should be taken. What we try to do, and I hopefully you feel this, is we try to make sure you're aware of requirements and that you're supported through training on various requirements and applications related to assessment. From my chair, I don't anticipate that all of you track Utah Code and Board Rule with your free time. So our effort is to try again to take those elements that are related to your work and discuss those in either the assessment director's meeting or share information about them in our memo or both sometimes. So those, and then as Kim mentioned, the assessment plan also is, the survey is put together to highlight requirements that are contained in board rule or code. We get into a little bit of different water in assessment than some of the other departments because we have vendors. So we have a code requirement to establish assessments. The assessments, we work with vendors. And then the vendors, we also have requirements that you might not find in board rule. We find those in the test administration manual. Typically, staff don't extend any requirements to the state, to LEAs, unless it's in board rule or statute. We've got this unique ground where we also have requirements for the fidelity of the assessments and the platforms that we use that have additional requirements. Volume, yeah, I would agree with that. It's hard to keep up with that. These comments again are pretty aligned. Our community here feels like there's not necessarily additional action. The compliance not always being clear, so clarity, improved clarity. Again, I believe that's part our responsibility as state employees to help LEAs with that. Clear communication, so that's clarity seems to be coming up. Always, communication can always be more clear. 95 slides. Hey, here's what's funny. When I see that, I'm like, oh yeah, we're under 100. That feels good.
Should we put it all together? I was really happy to see 95.
All right. Okay, let's go to the next one. Let's get through some of my slides so we can get part of that 95 back done. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. This is just, and you can reference this later if you'd like. This is just pulling language, specifically the recommendations. I've summarized those in other ways earlier. Let's go to the next. But I won't even really talk about these. This policy that requires 2 proctors. If I thought I had a question in here. Is there one coming up? Okay. Because I think this group will have comments about that and want to give feedback there. What should be done to improve the fidelity of proctoring requirements? Number 2, what should be done to improve control activities related to data entry and exchanges? So yeah, I probably should have separated. Let's focus on what should be done to improve the fidelity of proctoring requirements. The audit talks about unclear definitions of what proctoring is, active or passive proctoring, the 2 proctor requirement, the question whether there should be a 2 proctor requirement. So this is a place where we're accepting feedback on that specific requirement, 2 proctors. And that just leads into the other part of the audit. We're saying, well, so some people said the 2 proctors need to be in the room. Some people, when we went and talked to them, said 1 proctor could be somewhere else and 1 proctor need to be in the room. You know, if we talk ACT proctoring, it's really clear their definitions of what the proctoring and the roles of the proctors are. So the audit is highlighting from the state's perspective, if you're not as clear about proctoring requirements as you might find with ACT.
Second question is because accurate data also. How are we guaranteeing that? And there is only one person during the time.
Yeah, they're not separated from each other.
the reason there's two questions on this, besides just the two proctoring requirements, is also the question about data control activities and exchanges. Some of the things in the audit, the reason why Darren put two questions on the slide is, are two proctors also related to the fact that we have one person in the classroom and there's test administration questions now about the accuracy, how policies are being followed, required for statewide tests, for example, reading the scripts and things like that.
Yeah, it does sound like, looking at these comments, where it says it's been clear through these meetings multiple times, one proctor can be in the hall or some other location. I would agree with that statement. From a monitor, the auditor's perspective, that's not clearly included in the policy. That's not defined well, which leaves room for confusion. We also have the possibility that, are there some tests that require two proctors and some tests that don't, that wouldn't need that.
They'll give you the heads up that with remote proctoring for our online schools, you will have to have two proctors no matter what. It's not even an option. Two proctors will be required to be in the room in order to administer the test.
The virtual room.
On the virtual rooms, yeah, no matter what.
That's that was part of when the auditors met with me to interview me. They had a lot of questions about that. Again, there's clearly we're lacking clarity around it at a minimum, and whether it should be a requirement or not, that would be the policymaker's decision. But lots of good comments here. I'm going to leave this up for just another 30 seconds or so for those of you who want to go through and add additional ones. I hope it's not a majority of teachers violating ethics. To that question, as far as the amount that come in through the hotline or other ways for investigation, we don't have a majority of teachers that are getting flagged for that. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think that's my last question. We can go to the next slide, which I think reliability. Oh, we got to get it. About WIDA. So again, it's focused on home language survey, the screeners, and then the assessments being implemented. Again, there are no comments in the audit itself about the data reliability of the WIDA access. It's really about the flow of students and whether the right students are being tested and whether we're handling students the way our policies say. They also call out that we've got some inconsistencies between our rule and some other guidance we've provided. So we'll be working on cleaning that up over the next couple of months through our board. Let's go to the next slide. And then record retention. What I've done with record retention, we've started talking about record retention before the audit. Well, I guess when the audit came out, that triggered it. And we went to the state records retention site, and we referenced the same record retention rules the audit did, which are pretty general. One of those record retention rules was from 2012, the assessment data. What I found out is we have the ability as a state agency to customize or create our own records retention rules. So I forwarded this recommendation to our data committee that will be working on creating customized record retention rules related to state assessment. And so that it'll feel more, and it says here to work with LEAs. So expect we'll come back to this group as we get a draft or drafts related to that to get your feedback on creating, updating or new assessment retention rules that would apply to our work.
Thank you. Those are old.
Yeah, they were. I was surprised when I saw that. I was surprised with the length of time some of those things need to be stored. And so we'll, especially given that we have most of our stuff in databases. And so we'll work on that, and there'll be information coming to this group in the future. Okay, next slide. All right. Well, I'll pause for just a minute to see if there's anybody that has questions for me before I sit down. I'll be with this group for the rest of the meeting, though.
And Tracy, I know you had a hard stop at 10. We can move ahead and you can join us again at 11 if that would be better for you.
No, let's go ahead. I'll be here. I don't have that many slides. I think it's important. So let's go ahead and just keep moving forward. I've
Okay,
asked
let's-
others to keep track of the other meetings, so I'll be there just a little late.
Go ahead.
Very good. Thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate you being here this morning. We know you have a very busy lives, and we wanted to take this time to share with you some of the changes that have taken place with our Utah State ESSA plan. And on August 23rd, Adam Schott, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and Programs, basically said our new updated ESSA plan had been approved, kind of close to when we released data, we realized. Next slide. So in that vein, these amendments, we realize, impact how schools that are federally designated for school improvement are identified and or that they exit from these designations, and we want to update you on those changes. So following the federal school improvement designations, it's going to be impacting this year comprehensive support and improvement that were previously identified in 2018, additional targeted support and improvement schools, and targeted support and improvement as well. In a few years, we will have a third comprehensive comprehensive support and improvement, which will be referred to as targeted support and improvement, but that's not going to be impacted this year. Now, we recognize that the timing of this approval that's come from the Department of Ed is not really allowed for schools to adjust or shift in any ways. So we have made a request, and we are planning on this year only to use both the existing ESSA State Plan exit guidelines as well as the newly approved ESSA State Plan exit guidelines. And we're going to share with you what the new guidelines are, but wanted to emphasize for just this year, both exit criteria will be in place. So as we look at additional targeted support and improvement, it's been unclear, and USBE ourselves, we were unclear about the title of the student groups that were identified. And we wanted to let you know this last spring, we were notified that all of our current groups that are identified, our student groups that are identified, are considered additional targeted support and improvement. We've been kind of casually referring to them as TSI groups, but that was incorrect. So once the Department of Ed came and did a resource allocation review with us, they let us know that if they moved to CSI as the next step, that made it so they were designated, excuse me, as additional targeted support and improvement. So every district and every school group in those districts and LEAs are considered additional targeted support and improvement. Now, the Department of Ed notified us, and so we have to move forward, but please notice that. Now, here is the new additional targeted support and improvement exit criteria. There's two pieces here. The first piece is if you're an elementary, middle, or junior high, that you're going to reduce the gap in performance by a third from what your targeted support group's performance was with 55%. Now we're talking about the targeted performance. That is the number of points that they received out of the number of points possible. So if they had 31% of the points possible out of the total points, then they'd have to close the gap from 31 to 55. If you're a high school, the same is true, although you have to close the gap from your base, what the year you were identified, and 57% of all the points possible. That's the first criteria. And the second criteria is that same student group, once they've closed that gap, must have a performance that is above the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools from the year they were exited. So if you have a student group that was identified in 2018, you'd have to go back to 2018 and look at what was that lowest 5% performance of Title I schools. And when you look at the closing the gap goal that you have, we have to make sure that that is above whatever that 5% cutoff was. So it's two-pronged. I'm going to pause there just for a second to see if there's any questions. And please, those who are watching the chat, to feel free to interrupt. But wanted to see if there's any questions here.
I have a question. So to get out, have to be exceed the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools for the year that they were identified, that group?
That's correct. That's correct. So if you were identified in 2018, you'd go to 2018 to see what that 5% cutoff was. If you're identified in 2019, then that student group, you'd have to go look at what the Title I lowest 5% cutoff was from 2019. And one of the reasons I think that that will be important for us as our student groups are moving forward. We had some shifts, across our cutoff. So in 22, for instance, we had the highest number of points that the schools received, up to 40.27 points, whereas in 2018, I think it's around 34. So we're looking at the year you were designated, knowing that if things like pandemics and earthquakes happen, sometimes those shift, and we want you to be held accountable to the year that you were identified. Hal is asking if we have concrete examples, real numbers, real situations. We didn't really allocate this, Hal, right now for us to go through that, but let me say this. We have been starting to do road tours, and we'd love to either hop on a call with people or even come to you. We've presented to leadership teams at the LEA level, or we've even presented to principal groups. So we'll be happy to come and provide those concrete examples, even with some of the schools that you're working with specifically. But right now, this is more just an awareness piece. So if you could, that would be best that you reach out, James Martin or myself, to invite us to come and give you some feedback there. And Nate's saying there's a lot of data that goes into the percentage of points, right? A lot of indicators, and it's different between high schools and elementary and junior highs too. So that would be great. Thanks, Hal. We look forward to working with you too. Let's keep going. This is the additional targeted support and improvement, and that is for the new criteria. The old criteria is 2 consecutive years above the cutoff. Now, as we're looking at the comprehensive support and improvement group here, the 2022 designated CSI schools are not eligible to exit under the new criteria, because in the new criteria, it would be the 3rd year of your designation. However, there is a school that was designated in 2018 that had not exited. They were not re-identified, but they had not exited. So that school from 2018 could be eligible to use the new criteria, which, let's keep moving. You'll see the next criteria. And this is very similar to the student groups criteria. If you're in elementary or middle school, you need to look at in this case, your school's overall performance and look at the percentage of points that you received out of the out of the points possible. And you have to close the gap of your whole school by 1/3 between your baseline and the 55%. And if you're a high school, close that gap between 1/3 and, oops, it got cut off, 57%. So that slide's been cut off just a little bit, but it's the same criteria for high schools, closing the gap by 1/3 between your baseline and 57%. So this is 2 pieces again for this criteria. So this is exit criteria 1 for comprehensive support and improvement. And the next criteria, exactly the same as we had for the student groups. Your school must, next slide. Your school must also perform above the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools from the year that the school was identified. So thinking again about a CSI that was identified in 2018 that has not exited yet, they look at that criteria in 2018, they look at their overall school points, how many points did they get out of how many points were possible, and this is an elementary school, they must close that gap by 1/3 between what they had and what the 55% points are, and they have to make sure that they are above that cutoff of the lowest performing Title I school. So same criteria for the ATSI as well as the CSI, although ATSI is for student groups, CSI, of course, is for the whole school performance. I'm seeing a couple more questions coming in. Joan, going back to year of identification for a cut score, doesn't account for possible changes in how some of the indicators are calculated. There was a jump in 22 because of change in how growth was calculated. That's true, and that's what's been approved, Joan, from the Department of Ed. So this is what we have for now as we're moving forward. And then thanks, Anne Michelle, for answering questions there for Nate. So Jeremy is saying from Box Elder, as long as the 2 prongs are met, is the 2 consecutive years no longer required? That's true, Jeremy. You only have to meet those 2 prongs, and it will be different for every school and every student group. What I like about that is when you are identified, you will be able to calculate what is the exact % of points that you have to get in order to exit, because you will know on your identification at that time what that criteria will be, which I think is nice too, because sometimes when we have to say we have to be above a certain group, it's hard to know how the others are performing. So that's a great question, Jeremy. This year,
Hey, Tracy.
however, yes, sir.
Hey, Tracy. Could you put in the spreadsheet what that 5% is on the schools identified going forward? So once they're identifying that spreadsheet, they know
Yes.
immediately the points to get out.
Yes, actually, so the ATSI group and the CSI group, there will be a column eventually, but there will be a column that will give you exactly what that calculated points are, so you know what that cut score is. We're providing a draft of the 23 data. It will not be in the draft, but it will be in the later November release. So we have made plans for that, but we're cross-checking our work and making sure that the calculations are correct to meet both criteria. And going back to what Jeremy is asking about the 2 consecutive years, I just want to remind the group that this year only, schools can also have the opportunity to exit if they have 2 consecutive years back to back above the lowest 5% cutoff. That's going to impact our 2019 schools. They are not eligible under the new criteria because that's not in place until the 3rd year of identification. But 2019 schools that have 1 year and then have a 2nd year in 23, those 2 consecutive years are an additional opportunity for them to be able to exit. Great. Next slide. Graduation growth has slightly changed as well. We have a few schools that were identified in 2018 that will be able to take advantage of this. It used to be that you had to have 2 consecutive years above 67% in order to graduate that status. And it's now been changed so that you could have performance above 67% in the 3rd or 4th year of your identification. So some of those CSI grad schools, graduation growth schools that were identified in 2018 that haven't completely exited, if they have a performance above 67% this year, they would be able to exit that status. Next slide. And then this is just a reiteration that this is only for this year because the approval from the Department of Ed came so close to the release of our data. We wanted to honor that many schools have been working towards old guidelines. So we are honoring the original criteria for exit, and we're applying the newly approved criteria that's going to be used moving forward. So beginning next fall, only the new exit criteria that we briefly reviewed here will be in place for this upcoming year. So we wanted you to know that, and in the release, we are letting your student groups, the schools know, oh, you exited under the old criteria, or you exited under the new criteria, or in some cases, schools will also be removed from the ATSI list because the student group fell below 10 students, which is the minimum end size. And that will also be indicated on the document. And Hal, thanks again for just bringing it up, that it would be helpful. It is our intent to have that available for you, but We're getting other data to you first in draft form while we're working on that criteria, but we will provide you with an updated, clean spreadsheet that shows your current performance, shows also what your criteria is based on the year you were identified, because the exit cutoff and your base will shift depending on the year that you became an ATSI school. So open to other questions here. You should receive, you're going to have a draft, I believe, Greg, this week. So I'm looking in the chat, going to receive the updated ATSI actually information. So the updated information right now is based on 2018, 19, and 22 identified groups. You'll receive one this week that's going to be in draft form. It should have a watermark on there too. So you at least have an idea while we're waiting for feedback from LEAs about the preliminary data. That's what we think will be in place. However, if there are some changes or other errors that are identified, it could possibly postpone that release, but our expectation is that you will have that by November 6th. So going back to Hal's question of trying to make sure you've got that column in there that lets every school know what their goal is for their percent of points. It is our intent that we are going to be able to reach that November 6th date. I will say, in order for us to make sure that it's correct, it might be the 7th, it might be the 8th, but it will be that week. So our intent and everything we're doing is to get that in your hands by the 6th, but at least you'll have that draft so you'll have an idea what to expect.
Tracy, can I ask a question to clarify? This is Anne Michelle.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question to clarify TSI and ATSI?
Yeah.
Is it simply just a change in semantics? What we used to call TSI, we're now calling ATSI, or is TSI and ATSI, is ATSI a different and totally new group?
If you were from the Department of Ed, you would say ATSI has been the only group we've had so far. We just called it the wrong name. So I would say that ATSI and TSI are two separate groups. Moving forward, we will have two different designations. TSI is more like a warning, and the new TSI designations are 2 consecutive years, which are consistent with what we used to have. But the ATSI itself is a more rigorous intervention, requires more involvement from the state board. And as an ATSI group, if you do not exit, the next level of rigor, if you will, or intervention is that a group, if they're Title I, could become a targeted CSI. So we had only one group because we chose to take TSI and ATSI and combine it, and we referred to it as TSI, but that was incorrect. So I don't know. Does that help answer the question?
Oh,
No. We've never had TSI. We've never had TSI according to the Department of Ed, even though we all called it TSI. But the criteria that was there and the consequences and the involvement in the state requirements for resource allocation reviews and everything were all consistent with an ATSI, and our documentation was incorrect from 2018 on.
I think, Tracy, what confuses us is the TSI language was in our ESSA plan that was accepted. The 2017 ESSA plan was accepted with no reference to ATSI in our plan. We had used TSI language. So I think that's where you're getting Anne Michelle asking questions, and the rest thinking, this seems odd, like this shift feels unexpected.
Yeah, and I agree completely. And we have a lot of documentation, a lot of work to do to kind of clarify and label correctly. So we had made the assumption in our work with the Department of Ed, had been referring to them to TSI, but they let us know that was not a correct title, because the groups we have identified, if they were not going to exit, they became a CSI school. And that is the difference between a TSI or an ATSI if you're a TSI school and you don't exit, you become an ATSI school. The next level would be moving into ATSI. But in what we had in our first level, and I believe there's some reference to ATSI, we just used the same language, but we had it set up so that they would become a CSI. So the Department of Ed said they've been mislabeled. That is the higher and more rigorous involvement for the federal designation. So we will work on trying to create some documentation to help clarify those differences. Not in the slides, but just an FYI, this is the first year we would end up having both groups, because this year we'll have TSI identified. The exit criteria for TSI moving forward is you only need to be 1 year above the cutoff. So we're hoping that that helps schools, identify the areas that they want to shift and be able to move out of that designation more quickly as kind of a warning. So
Okay.
I see that Anne Michelle is saying, yeah, we're going to work together on infographics and some slides, and we'll have to go back with some previous documents to adjust the language.
Okay. So in reality, I'll just to summarize the way I'm thinking about this. In reality, TSI is now just ATSI. It's just a label. That group of designations is really just switching the label. The consequences related to ATSI apply to what we used to call TSI, and then TSI becomes a new layer of identification, which is really a pre-notice that, hey, this school's on track. They could become ATSI if the trajectory they're on doesn't change.
Yes, and in fact, we would love to come back to this meeting and possibly provide some of the more, hopefully friendly documents that Hal's asking for, and go into more detail and maybe have some infographics for you that you could share with your schools as well. And as I said earlier, we are spending time traveling and Zooming. So we'd be happy to come and talk with your leadership or your principals about all these shifts moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Anne Michelle Neal. I'm going to be talking about the school report card. So the school report card was released this week for you to preview securely. There is a secure URL and a password for you to be able to preview the report card for 2 full weeks before we publish it to the public. During this time, please share it within your LEA, share it with your superintendents, your school community councils. All of that is fine. This time period is for you to do 2 things: prepare communication to your stakeholders, but also to see if there are any questions about the data for your LEA that you have and want to look into. I can't look at a school or a district report card and know if that data is I can make a guess and in a sense is if something is right or obviously wrong, but you know more than I do. So in terms of frequently asked questions, and that's the purpose of why I'm talking to you today, is to answer questions. One question stands out over the years as very, very common, and that is when on your school or district profile page, it shows the principal's name or the superintendent's name. The principal has changed or you have a new superintendent, and that is not reflected on the school report card. This needs to be corrected by your LEA in Cactus. I cannot go in and change Cactus for you, nor should I be messing with your Cactus systems. And I don't want to. That is for you. It comes to us through the nightly UTRX upload. So you need to work with your LEA to have those changed. We will refresh it before we publish it to the public. We have to pull that data from UTRX and reload it, and then it will reflect the correct principal or superintendent. All right, you now have a Jamboard. Yeah. You have a Jamboard for you to ask questions, make comments about the school report card. Super excited to see what you think.
And you'll notice that we added the little note that we can't answer specific LEA's examples, of course, because it's embargo data, it's a public forum. But if you're just asking a specific question, we're trying to save Anne Michelle from 47 emails that she's answering in the exact same manner. So.
I will say that so far, this release seems to be the most smooth that we have had. That's a good point, a good question. I thought that the total points and overall school proficiency would remain and only letter grades would be removed. That is correct. If you scroll to the bottom of your performance page, there's a little donut that tells you how points are distributed, and then you will see the points possible and the points earned by the school. Those are all on your report card, and you can total those to determine your percentage. Proficiency is the achievement indicator. You still receive points for the achievement indicator in the same way that you always have. What is the order of release of data? We usually release data gateway data before the school report card. The data gateway in general has less restrictive rules than the school report card. We apply a lot of additional decision rules to the accountability system than we do to the data that we put on the data gateway. Probably the most frequent example is full academic year. The data gateway shows you all the students, regardless of how many days they were enrolled. For them to count in accountability, they have to be enrolled in your school for 160 days. That is full academic year. So that is most frequently the difference between what you're seeing on the data gateway versus what you're seeing in the school report card. Good point. Confusing element on the school report card is that growth is not the same as median growth percentile or MGP. We often, when we aggregate growth to a teacher level or a grade level or school or LEA, we think it's the MGP. The accountability system uses a growth index score. And you have to refer to the accountability technical manual to understand how that growth index score works. We removed AGP, or student growth targets, from growth this year, but we have done that for a few years and through our waivers and addendums in the COVID years. But the accountability growth score is not MGP. It is a mean growth index score, and you have to kind of understand that index to understand growth. I will mention also that in our new amendment and approved plan, we added a zero possible for zero, meaning students on the index can earn between a percentage of a point between 0 and 1. The last 2 years, 0 was not possible. All students received a minimum of 0.25. In our amendment, we saw the need that we have to have a range of SGPs where 0 points are awarded. And so this year is kind of a reset of baseline for growth, but growth has kind of been in limbo a little bit for the last 2 years. I thought I answered that.
Difference in the percentage.
Yeah, that the differences in the data gateway and the school report card are because we apply more rules to the school report card. Most frequently, it can be attributed to full academic year.
There's a question in the chat from Joan. Could you point us to a specific place where we could see how students are attached to teachers? It differs from rostering rules here, but the attachment to a teacher on this end is not.
That's a good point. We do have decision rules for how we assign students to a course, and that course is within a school. Accountability never looks at the teacher level. It only goes to the school level. The business rule, those decision rules are not currently in the accountability technical manual, but if it would be helpful for you, I'd be happy to add them in, or we can publish them somewhere else. But I think the accountability technical manual, as comprehensive as it is, would be the most appropriate place.
I'll ask, can you repeat the growth comments again, the new baseline?
Yes. So, okay. Students for accountability earn a percentage of a point on a growth index between 0 and 1. There are ranges of SGPs that say, okay, if it's 80 or above, they earn a full point. If it's between 65 and 79, they earn 0.75. And we take those point weights and sum them all for, and then divide by all students. We get a mean growth index score. It is not MGP. It's the mean growth index score. Several years ago, I talked about this and have some slides about how this works. I'd be happy to present about that, and again in a future meeting. But it is really important to know that this year we have adjusted those point ranges and the index point that they can earn from previous years. So this year is a reset of the baseline, or a break in trend, maybe is the more accurate way to say that, than from previous years.
Well, and Michelle, let me just let me ask a clarifying question. So really, when 2020 hit and we interrupted our assessment cycle, so all students went a year without a test, that's when our change to growth. So in 2021 and 2022, we had changes in how growth could be calculated, because we had to use skip year growth one or both of those years. So if I understand correctly, and you correct me if I'm wrong, the break in trend line for growth really is 2019.
That's correct. Yeah. Yes. And another slight shift in trend again this year. So helpful. Okay.
How the students in the lowest quartile are identified. I've researched in the manual, but I'm replicating the LQ data using the manual's guidelines with what is provided in Tableau.
Okay, I'm not sure what is in Tableau, but I can help you I can explain what I know about how the sausage is made for lowest quartile. We look at achievement scores from the prior year. Their proficiency, not growth, their proficiency score on RISE or Aspire Plus. It doesn't matter where they were enrolled. They're in your school now. We can look at their achievement. It's 1 year. We take the bottom 25% of students in terms of rank order, the lowest performing 25%. That's the lowest quartile. So
based on grade level?
No, whole school. All tests. And subjects are combined. A third grader can be in the lowest 25%. A sixth grader can be in the lowest 25%.
So it's on their test. So third grader last year on the third grade test, lowest quartile.
Okay, so you would just mark them their lowest quartile. Okay.
Yes. And if they're in the bottom 25%. We don't do it separately. There's not a lowest quartile for third grade, for fourth grade, for fifth grade. It's whole school lowest quartile. And then we look at those students' growth scores in the following year. In lowest quartile, in this indicator, we do use SGP only. And if we look at, did they get an SGP of 40 or higher? And that is the percentage of points that you earn for growth of the lowest quartile. It's not indexed like other student growth. This is a different metric with different methodology.
Those of you who are typing lots of comments in the chat, would you please join the Nearpod and put them in the collaborative board, because Ann Michelle's trying to keep track of all this for future trainings as well. And it's really difficult for us to answer all the questions in the chat, and you're probably asking questions that other people are asking. So it would be really helpful if you would just add them to the collaborative board. I think you've got the next question was the EL data for achievement based on the adjusted exit criteria for this year?
Yes. So really great question, and something that we worked very hard on. The EL progress data is based on the new exit criteria and the old exit criteria. Similar to how Tracy talked about, this is the only year we will do that. But we allowed students to exit in the spring based on the 5.0, and then in the fall after our amendment approval based on the 4.2 overall composite with a speaking of 3.5. Both of those are combined to give you your percent of students who reached proficiency. Now, I want to say that on page 20 of the technical manual, the tables for adequate progress have changed from our previous ESSA plan and were revised for our new exit criteria and the new ESSA plan. So students making adequate progress has changed a little bit, and adequate students at reaching proficiency includes both the old and the new criteria. If a student at any time reaches proficiency, we count them in made adequate progress. Even if their target was a 0.8, they earned a 0.4 increase, but they met the exit criteria. That's good enough for them to count as making adequate progress. So your adequate progress score should always, your adequate progress score should always be equal to or greater than the percent of students making proficiency.
I have a comment. Just a thing to think about, that this complexity generally makes this operationally ineffective for any of our schools. As long as I'll speak for myself, as long as I'm not in a bucket somewhere that says bad, it's because I'm trying to explain this to one of my teachers or a principal in a meaningful way to say, hey, how can I use this information? The answer is, we don't look at it. Really is just a thing. Hey, good. We're not in the bottom somewhere, right? We're going to work for another year.
I understand that. And I understand that the complexity is somewhat prohibitive in accessing the information, and that there are some things that feel like a black box. I understand that. I also understand that unless you have an identification based on accountability, that you may not be paying attention. I get that, especially with the removal of letter grades and that label of we're a C school, which is really like most schools in the state are typical. It's based on a normal curve. Very different than, say, when we turned in an essay and got a C when we worked really hard and wanted an A. It's not the same thing. So letter grades were very interesting way to communicate school performance, but that is now gone.
Yep.
So schools may not be paying attention. What is important is looking at it as a dashboard for where schools can improve. Also as a way to monitor, am I close to being identified? If I perform at the same level next year, will I be identified for some category? An early warning system, if you will.
It's a good comment you've got, because it speaks to what's the purpose of school accountability. Is the school report card primary audience educators, or is it some other group? And when I started here, we were just starting, the 2017 legislation had passed, and so we were just starting to design the new accountability dashboard. And so I got assigned to that. And it was one of the first questions that I asked is, who's the audience? Like the school report card, to decide how it should be laid out, who's our audience? And it was clear that the community, the public, for the school report card, the public or parents is the primary audience. Now, since then, Representative Peterson last year passed a piece of legislation that requires us to do a school comparison dashboard as well. I don't know how many of you use that. I actually had to have somebody help me find the link to it. It wasn't easy for me to find that on our website. So we have this additional, all of these in the data gateway, they use the same data sources, but as Ann Michelle pointed out, data gateway is more inclusive of all your students, doesn't apply accountability rules, school report card, get all this technical challenges, and is part of why it gets delayed. And then now you have the school comparison dashboard, which is designed for parents to go in and be able to compare that school to this school using the same metrics. But yeah, the school accountability system, the way I understand it is that its main purpose is to meaningfully differentiate schools. So to your point, if I'm not identified as being differentiated for either reward or for some kind of an improvement plan, I don't attend to it. There's a part of me that says that's probably the natural. I don't know that that's not intended, is what I'm saying, because the report card, again, is designed for the community. Whereas the data gateway, all the reports we've got in the data gateway, which is part of the value of trying to release those as early as possible, still not as early as we'd like, is designed for your education community to use that data to evaluate your programs, curricular programs, instructional programs, the quality of those. So it's a great observation. And I don't know that you're off mark. I don't know that we have a solution for that, because it might be that that's part of the design of the school report card is take all this stuff, run it through the blender into some format that allows us to meaningfully differentiate schools in some way that can target additional resources as necessary and recognize excellence as possible.
That's correct. Thank you, Darren. I'm seeing a lot of comments about how do I explain this, and isn't the report card intended for parents? Yes, it is. The accountability system that operates behind the scenes that I talk about all the time, because I am that person who can't see the forest through the trees, is intended for parents. We look at every single thing on the school report card and ask ourselves, is this understandable to parents? There are a few resources on the school report card that are intended for parents to help make it clear. Something a lot of people don't pay attention to are the descriptions at the top of every page. Those are intentionally written for parents. There is a parent frequently asked question document in that upper top description. At the bottom of the page, there are two links. One takes you to the accountability technical manual. The other one is called See Info on the System. And that it goes to an infographic about school accountability. So we have both the parent FAQ and the very public-friendly two-pager on this system. It just gives you a clear breakdown of accountability indicators, what goes into each one. And I would say use those. We also have the SGP videos linked on the school report card, all of those things. Also the new little info buttons with the pop-ups, all of those are meant to make this more accessible to the public. I understand how you feel, because I look at other states' report cards and I go, what the heck? Like, okay, it says 79. 79, what? Is it a percentage? 79 out of something? Is it I don't know what 79 means. So we try very hard to avoid that. And the indicator level ratings, the meters, are there to help you get a sense of how each indicator is doing. That is something that is unique to Utah. At least it was.
We've got two questions. One is, can we still add school indicators? And is there a deadline when the window?
Yes, you can still add school self-reported indicators. Please do. During the COVID years, I think that became very low priority. I understand why. The window is open. I now have master control over that window. They let me do one thing. And it's open through December 20th. I can extend that if you need to. There is an appendix in the technical manual that gives you examples. It functions very much the same as it always has. There was a question about, do I have slides about changes? Yes, I do.
Is the reading on grade level historical data based on Lexile for each of the past 3 years? There is an over time chart that would be impacted if that measure changed 2021 to this year's definition of grade level.
Really good point. Reading on grade level is not, I want to emphasize, is not an indicator that has any point or weights in the system. It is just a piece of information that we added for elementary schools because there was this sort of gaping hole. And in its design, the district level Acadian schools were very much a focus. We added that to the school report card as an unscored measure, similar to attendance, post-secondary enrollment. The reading on grade level is based on Lexile, the same way that it has been. If there has been a change, probably nobody knew to notify me. So it is calculated as it always has been. If that's helpful, which it may be, because trend is always helpful. Anytime I can avoid breaking trend, that's a priority for me. But if it's more helpful to reset that indicator to align with the more current district goals that are required, I can look into that and see how we can best implement it without interrupting the data release, which is of course the priority.
Question, what is the definition of low, average, and high in the bottom 25%? It should be listed on the report. Why different descriptors?
Really great point. Because the percentage is a mean growth index score, it's very hard to understand. So we added the low, average, and high, which is a normative measure, calculated differently than the percentage. We'd look at the distribution and have standard deviation, 1 plus or minus 1 standard deviation is in the typical range. Low is below 1 standard deviation, high is above. It's just a different way to help interpret the growth measure. That low or average or high growth is, like I just said, it's a different piece of information to help people interpret what they're seeing, because a percentage, especially a percentage that is a mean growth index score, is not super helpful. And I recognize that. I do think that the current descriptors, the low, average, and high, needs to be maybe rerun based on, because we have reset the trend, the baseline, changed the metric. The distribution may look different than it has in the past. I need to check with Erin. I thought that was run annually. I want to make sure that that's what's happening. I did look at one school that had 50% mean growth index scores in all subjects, and also said low. It's really hard to say, like, is that low? Relative to the rest of the state, it could be below 1 standard deviation in the distribution.
There are lots and lots of requests for slide decks and more information. That's one of the reasons why we did this, so we could see what questions you had so that Ann Michelle can target the training to what you need, because there's only so much we can. So. Oh yeah, the lowest quartile question about how the students in the lowest quartile are done. Somebody asked, is this calculated by subject? Science has a much higher scale score than math and ELA. And then for LQ, the technical manual also says the students have to have an SGP from the previous year. Is this rule also applied?
They do not have to have an SGP from the previous year. It's based on, well, no, it's based on current year SGP. I will review that. I'm curious if you.
The third graders wouldn't count then because you don't have an SGP for them. Only be fourth grade and above.
Correct. It's a good point. You have to have an SGP in the current year. So you have to have a prior year score. You must have a prior year score, an achievement score. You don't need a prior growth score, just an achievement score. And you have to have an SGP in the current year. I'll look at the manual again. I did not catch that in my most recent revision, which Kim can attest to. I made a lot of revisions. Not changes, but just trying to clarify things. The accountability technical manual is where most answers can be found. I've made slide decks for things like self-reported indicators. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Kim. I've made slide decks for self-reported indicators. I've made slide decks I have lots and lots of slide decks for accountability. I'd be more than happy to put together some slides for you to use in trainings. I've also had some of you send me slides that I've looked at that are fantastic. You guys are doing an excellent job trying to explain this to people. And most of the time I'm like, yeah, you get it. This is right. And I've borrowed some of your ideas. So don't hesitate to send something my way for me to spot check. And I'm happy to do that. You guys do excellent work. So in the accountability technical report, these aren't necessarily changes. I just want to highlight a few sections. Firstly, our theory of action. We really do lean on our theory of action when we make these decisions about how indicators and methodology should be calculated. Does it meaningfully differentiate? Can it be disaggregated? Are we avoiding unintended consequences? Does it incentivize schools to engage in effective practice? Those are all things that are in our theory of action that we use and rely on to make decisions about indicators. The methodology for every indicator is there with the formula. You can calculate based on the number of points and your percentages. All of that works. I do it a lot. And if you have questions, I'm happy to talk through it with you. There is a section on school improvement that has been updated based on what Tracy presented before. Breathe. Just know that as we continue to develop resources around the new school improvement identification and exit, there will be an update I anticipate around December that will flesh out that section with more clarity about TSI, ATSI, and the exit criteria. I have a whole appendix that I'm working on for how to calculate your district goals. We have a calculator where you just plug in the total points that the school earned, points possible. It will determine for you which goal is higher, the closing the gap or the meeting the baseline, the Title I score, and plot out interim goals and the exit score. It is all in Excel right now. Megan Tippett is making it much nicer for you, but all these things are coming. I want to point out that Appendix A, participation codes, there are some changes to participation codes. Namely, we have invalidated and moved it and divided it into invalidated because of breach in ethics and proctoring or students cheating, and invalidated because the parent turned in an opt-out, requested opt-out after the test was given, so that we can very easily just differentiate between the two. That's just one example, but a few other participation codes have changed. Again, growth is hard. Student growth percentiles are not easy to understand. Appendix D has a very friendly explanation of what student growth percentiles are. And there are case examples for EL progress in Appendix F. Because many of you have questions about how do I determine the target the student needs to meet? What is the target? How do I choose which table the student falls in? Because it's based on initial year of identification and initial proficiency level. So I would say refer to that, please. Go ahead.
I put the break in here after all of this. We gotta have a break after.
Can I just close with one statement? Accountability systems are complex. They are. There is no accountability system I have ever seen that is not complicated. The machinations behind the scenes can be separate somewhat from the reporting. We try to make the reporting very friendly, very accessible. If you have feedback on certain things, happy to hear that. But accountability systems are complex. Reporting is can be a different thing. And we try to make that a bit easier to access.
Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. So 11:02. Back to the-
And please stay on the Nearpod. Scott has information he needs, and so does Teresa. So please don't exit out of the Nearpod. Scott has on the. Oh, I know. That's to run.
And there's peanut butter bars back there. Which
If you're ever wondering, wait, when are the testing windows? When are the things? Click on those little links right at the top. And this is one of the things that's up here, just so you're kind of aware of what's happening as far as October and November goes. We updated this a few months ago. So if some things have changed a little bit, remember that this is an overall thing kind of to guide all assessment directors of the general things that happen in these months. It's not like checklist all the time, but we have many new people, it's a lot easier for you to kind of keep track. Go ahead and click the next. Really quick reminder, I've already gotten, believe it or not, I'm on my 7th alert. We've already gotten 7 alert papers just from RISE, benchmark modules and interim tests. I wanted to let you know that we also get alert papers from WIDA. From Reader Access Test, we get alerts from Utah Aspire Plus, and we get alert papers, believe it or not, from Apple assessments as well. So you may be, don't get confused if you get something, you're like, wait, this isn't from RISE, this is from other things. All of our vendors are very committed to protecting our students, as all of us are. And so just remember that they're there. I started going through the testing plan report. And if you remember last year, we specifically requested in the spring that everyone identify a second person within your LEA that you would consider a safe person to also receive alert papers. And many of you, for whatever reason, I thought it was clicked that it was required, but a lot of people left it blank or put NA. If you need, remember that by state law, that notification rule is taken very seriously. So when you get that notification, the expectation is that you are reaching out immediately to the school administrators, whoever it is that your normal contact notification rules within your LEA. And then you need to let me know within 48 hours, we say within 48 hours, because we know sometimes we don't get these alerts till like 3:30 in the afternoon. Sometimes it takes you a day to reach out, but we need to know right away that you have handled it and that the parents have been notified or the appropriate action has been taken.
When does the 48 hours start? Like if
The minute you get the notification.
On Friday.
If you get it on Friday, you still have to reach out and notify them. And the reason being, here's the thing, the notification rules are pretty specific and I don't have all the code in front of me. But I will say that you can pretty much read the content and judge which ones seem particularly alarming. And trust me, we have actually had multiple ones, sadly, it's not lovely out there right now for our kids. And we had multiple ones last year that I've been even emailed back from AD saying, we weren't even aware that the student was in crisis. And if they had waited through the weekend, we're not sure. Okay. So remember that, and it's there, like I said, it's one of the most difficult part of, honestly, the most difficult part of my job. I hate them with every fiber of my being because it just makes me sad for our kids. And it makes me sad for you because you also are dealing with it.
Well, oftentimes I do notify
Mm-hmm.
the interested parties
Right.
on that Friday, but
Right. It's really important that you also take this information and stress it down with your school administrators. Like we understand that sometimes, it's Friday at 4:00, but some people really have this in a good system in place. That's up to you. But we do want you to remember that if nothing else, at the very minimum, we've notified the principal, this is what's happening. I really like it when you email me back and say, not only have the school administrators been notified, but it's been handled by our counselors. Everything has been resolved. The student is fine or whatever the deal is. A lot of you just say school counselors are handling it. That is not enough notification. Like that's fine to say that. I don't need to know the details, but I have to know myself, it's part of the notification rules. Like I have to know that it's been handled. Specifically, like the student is now safe or whatever. Okay. Next slide. And I think that's it for me. Yep. Maureen.
And I just have a couple of slides as well. We've got a couple of pre-ID files coming up. ACT, our pre-ID file for that is going to be done on November 6th. ACT now goes live on November 7th. We're trying to get in a little early so we can have all of your students in there when it goes live, but it's not a sure thing. So it could be you log in on November 7th and your students aren't quite there yet. But as soon as I have access to the live site, I'll get your students in there for you. WIDA, our first pre-ID file is going to go on November 9th. Then we'll have our second one in January. I'm sure your data right now is as good as it's going to be since everyone just hit go on the finalizer. So that's probably not going to be an issue for you right now. Next. And Apple testing window opens next Monday. So please just have your teachers check their rosters just a few days before they plan on testing, because as you know, rostering issues do take a couple of days to resolve. So if they could just check a few days before so we can be all ready for their testing dates, that would be great. Next. Our code list, then student rostering manual. That's all the information you would ever need to know about our assessments. Please read them. Next, I think that's it for me.
Magically in one slide.
I know, right? Everything you need to know. What am I doing here? As always, if you have any rostering questions, please get in touch and I'll be happy to help you out with them.
Okay, I just want to reshare some resources around accommodations and accessibility. And I hope that you pass this on to your special education administrators and they're disseminating that to your special ed teachers, because we're in front of y'all more than we are in front of our SPED personnel. So Tracy Gooley and I have some open office hours. Our next sessions are in November. So you can share that Zoom link to your SPED people in your district. That Zoom link works for all of the meetings. We just have some short information that we're going over around accessibility. And then it's a great time for them to just ask any burning questions so they have direct contact with us.
And then also ensure that you are sharing these key resources. Tracy and I put together a Padlet, and it's really like a one-stop shop around all accessibility information that you need to know for our state assessments, as well as our updated 23-24 participation policy book and the assessment webpage. And there's our contact information as well as who to reach out to for each assessment. That's it.
Okay. Weta, feel like I'm going to be on repeat a little here, but here we go. Screener reminders. This slide should look familiar, but I am still on a daily basis getting asked the question, has the entrance criteria changed? Nope, that has stayed the same. Please, 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 like get out, your megaphone, start screaming it from the mountaintops for me, because I get asked this every day. The overall composite score of 5.0 or higher is proficient. A 4.9 or lower qualifies for language services. I see some people like mouthing it as I say it because they're like, we've heard you say it a million times. But I do think it bears repeating. Also, just remember that please go to the TAM. Page 13 lets you know the grade bands that are supposed to be applied to students when they're being screened. And one other thing that I want to just repeat is that for the kindergarten screener, everything is free and it is all available in the WETA secure portal. The kindergarten screener, a little different than the 1st through 12th grade screener because you do not need to use WETA AMS. Everything for kindergartners is in the secure portal when it comes to screening, including the score calculator and how you print out those reports to put them in their cumulative folders. And please do that if you haven't been doing that. All right. Training opportunities, again, on repeat, but I want to draw your attention to our alternate access overview. Alternate access, major overhaul this year. We did some field testing last year and things have changed quite a bit. I gotta say, got into Midas, have a big old goose egg for people signed up for this training. I'm a little worried because this test has seen a big overhaul. We need people to be trained on how to administer this updated assessment. We do need people that are test administrators giving the access test and screeners to make sure that they are doing annual trainings. Lots of changes are taking place on the actual platforms and the tests themselves. Okay, please send these opportunities out. Also, make sure that you are checking the training status of your test administrators. I can go in and check, but it's really hard to do that for every single LEA and to know who's actually giving the tests and when. But I can say I can look and I can see that there are some LEAs where 0 people have been doing trainings, yet they're giving screeners. So please, please make sure trainings are happening.
Megan, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
So if we have people that are assisting in that do not have that are not in Midas because they're not educators. I understand is there a way for us to give them a Midas number without them being an educator?
It's right there on when they go into Midas, it says if they need an account.
They can sign up for their own account. And is that the only way they access this? Is through the Midas? They can't do it any other way?
They can email me if that method doesn't work.
Usually what happens if something, I have a loud voice, so apparently through that. If you ever have, we use Midas for everything. And if you ever have people come to you and say, I can't get into Midas, have them, all they need to do is click on the Midas link that says What do I do if I can't get in? And there's help.
There is.
Emily, if you email Emily, we used to have everybody email Emily, but all Emily's going to tell them is go to Midas and this is what you have to do. I mean, literally you have to click on the link and it does guide them. If they don't have a Cactus ID or whatever it is, everyone has access to Midas. It's part of the contract. So that excuse, you can now tell them like, let me show you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for
Thank
answering
you.
that. Thank you.
All right, next slide. Again, lots of changes. The updated user guide for WIDA AMS. This is the assessment management system where you do screeners 1 through 12, access, everything access. Those that have been published, you can get them in a couple places. It's linked here. Anyone that has to use AMS, even test administrators, please make sure they have access to this user guide and they know how to navigate it well before testing. Okay. So again, communication is crucial. Megaphones, yell into your microphones. I feel like I'm in a recording school because we're all speaking to the ceiling. Please make sure that everyone has access to this user guide, okay? Lots of changes have taken place in AMS. All right, I think that, nope, I have more. Repeat, I'm on repeat. Guess what? I should have updated my slide. Maureen says November 9th, right?
Yes.
Okay, so our first pre-ID file, November 9th, get your SIS updated. I've had a lot of LEAs reaching out about saying, hey, you guys haven't updated my SIS. And I say, oh, that's because we can't touch your SIS. We don't have access to update your SIS for you. That's your responsibility. I'm sorry, I wish I could do that, but okay, never mind. I've been told I don't want to do that. I wish I could assist you, but apparently I should not. Your SIS is your SIS. I can't update that. The state cannot update it. So please make sure that you are updating it. That way, come November 9th, Maureen can just pull that pre-ID file and all is awesome. And then the second pre-ID file, January 5th, I'm going to update this slide. So the next time I'm on repeat, you'll be like, oh yeah, she's finally got it in there. That will be updated, that second pre-ID. Hopefully that takes some off your shoulders. Do note, test material ordering is coming up really soon as well. We do all of your regular access testing materials order for you. You are responsible for Braille and alternate or any maybe like large print paper. Okay, so those instances where, you have unique situations and students require different testing formats. You do need to order that. That will happen that's weird. It doesn't have a box around it. It'll start on the 31st. Halloween, spooky, go order materials. All right. Hopefully that will make it stick though.
In red.
It is. It's missing part of its box though, so it threw me off. You will be receiving your on the 4th and the 5th. Happy New Year's. So just make sure that depending on your school's winter closures and everything, make sure that there are people to sign for it. UPS, I believe it's going to be delivered by UPS. They will make 3 attempts to deliver before they send it back. So they just need a signature. Make sure that someone will actually sign for it, though. You don't want any disgruntled employees being like, no, send it back. That has happened. So reach out if you have questions. There's been some chat about, hey, can we get additional trainings to really address concerns we have, audit findings, all this kind of stuff. And Michelle and I will get together with this amazing leadership team and see what we can do. So stay tuned.
You have a question in the chat.
Oh boy, here we
The
go.
alternative access overview in Midas is inactivated for registration. Do you know when the course will be active?
Oh, well, there's a problem. No wonder no one signed up. I'm not sure how it's inactivated, but thank you for telling me. I am not a Midas expert, but Emily and I are going to put our heads together to see what's going on. I'm so glad I've said something.
There's a box in my.
Jared's going to fix it for us.
You don't have to make a stick. Do it.
Jared's on it. Don't worry.
Knowing Emily, she's probably just fixed it.
Emily might have already fixed it. We'll wait wherever she's at. Did you have a question?
Yeah, but it's more
like a hallway conversation?
Yeah.
Let's do it. All right. If y'all need hallway conversations, I'm available and Michelle's available. That won't be suspicious at all. Contact information, email's the best. That's the easiest. Thank you guys.
All right, just a few things for Apple administration. The welcome letter was sent the beginning of the month. If your teachers still have not received it, tell them to check their junk mail because it goes there sometimes. And it's two. There's two. That's the other thing is one will come and then the second one gets flagged because it came at the same time from a no reply address. So the first one will come through with their username and then I get an email that says, but I didn't get a password. It's probably sitting in their junk mail. The window opens October 16th and runs through December 1st. Remember with our window for Apple, the earlier you test, we promise the easier your life will be. And we do know that there are still hiccups, but it's just easier when you start earlier. And as another plug for this, I will actually be out of the office starting November 20th through at least December 1st. And if you look at that window, those last 2 weeks are generally when you sometimes have some headaches. I won't be here. Kim and Jessica are anxiously engaged in helping me with that. But I'm just letting you know, I will be out of office for at least 2 weeks. So the earlier you start, the more help you're going to get. I don't know how else to say it. Don't skip your systems check. Have your students and teachers run through the demo. Sometimes we get some questions that say the students didn't know that there were directions provided in English and then they started to respond in English instead of the target language. If they had done the demo, they would have experienced that. And the teacher could have said, no, you don't have to do that. It's just going to provide you the directions in English and then you're going to respond in the target language. And the teacher can't always or isn't always available to provide that guidance. That's me, I'm sorry. Stereo. There were some new procedures for this upcoming administration regarding setting accommodations, requesting accommodations, as well as rating review requests. If you were unable to attend the training or if the personnel who are over your Apple administration were unable to attend, it was recorded. I've posted the link here and you can go back and review it. As a plug for accommodations, those requests do need to be made 10 days prior to testing. Don't wait till the last 2 weeks. Just don't. just don't do it. You'll be happier. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Apple is hosting a webinar coming up about making Apple data more actionable. And I am just kindly passing along the information to you. I don't know much more about it other than it is free. Registration is available. And those two lovely people who are listed on the slide are the ones who are hosting it. So if you have people who might be interested in knowing more about how to make their Apple data more actionable, that is something that they might be interested in attending.
At least, is it true that that's not a Utah specific?
It is not a Utah specific training, no. For UTIPS, just a heads up here, there will be a server update coming soon. When that happens, UTIPS becomes unavailable for that brief window. We don't anticipate it being longer than 24 hours, but that is going to be messaged through the AD memo unless it's really close to our next AD meeting, and then I could tell you in person. So just be watching that, because if you have teachers who are using the UTIPS platform and then you're going to get 75 emails that say, I can't get logged in, things are not working. This is why. Okay, so just kind of be aware of that. There will be some server updates. I will message it out when we know a specific timeline.
Well, I am not Teresa, but I'm presenting her slides today. So if you've tried to email Teresa within the last 2 weeks, she's been out and you've likely sent that email to me. So hopefully if I've responded back to you, or if you have continuing questions, or if you need something more pressing before Teresa gets back on Monday, then let me know. But we wanted to talk a little bit about the changes with KEEP that Darren mentioned that were approved in our last board meeting, about some changes with administration and what's required for our kindergarten assessments for next year. So one of the big changes was that starting in the 24-25 school year, we'll be requiring the Acadience reading and Acadience math assessments to be administered in kindergarten, and will no longer be requiring the KEEP assessment. We'll still provide the KEEP assessment, and the platform through Data Gateway will be available, and we'll support that as well. But the required assessment will be the Acadience reading and Acadience math assessment. So that will start in the 24-25 school year. Another big change that came about with that board meeting was the change to the rule that described the amount of days that were available to administer assessments in kindergarten, where students were not required to attend those days. So that section was removed from the rule. So one of the things we wanted to start thinking about and brainstorming, and some of the communication that we've had with some of you and your colleagues in the last couple of weeks since that board rule changed, was how do you assess students? And one of the things in the Nearpod we wanted to get was ideas about your thoughts about administering the KEEP assessment, if you still plan to, and being flexible with those days when you're required to administer the Acadience assessment. One of the things that as we were discussing the board rule, we noted that, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's more than 90% of you are already administering the Acadience reading assessment in kindergarten. So that shouldn't be a huge change in timing. If you're planning to administer the KEEP assessment still, do you have recommendations for others about how you are scheduling that time with students? The other nice thing is that we no longer have the board rule of the timeline for when that administration is required. So people have reached out to us and asked, hey, we've wanted to use this as part of our kindergarten roundup. So can we use the KEEP assessment in the spring as we're trying to like sort classes and things for kindergarten for the fall? And that's now a possibility. The trick will be like rostering and having those students available. But if you just want to use like the paper pencil version and not necessarily enter scores into the system, that is a possibility. Some people saying they're not sure if they're going to be using KEEP next year or not, finding dates for testing moving forward. Some people not planning on administering. Okay, so some people considering going back to a previous assessment that they used before KEEP, while still using the Acadience reading and math assessments in kindergarten. Like that maybe. One more. Oh, brainstorming. Oh yeah, okay, so some thinking about using it during administration or excuse me, registration. So the question here about will the administration window open early so they can administer Acadience reading and math before the school year? No, that's not part of the testing assessment manual and guidelines for the Acadience assessment. So their recommendation is that you wait at least a week after school starts. So our testing windows that are open with the board rule will apply for kindergarten as well as it does for the first, second, and third grade students. So you're not able to administer Acadience assessments before the school year starts. I'm glad that's a good question to ask. Okay, so as you think of more questions, or if things come up and you have questions about continuing to use the KEEP or concerns with that, let Teresa or myself know. I'm Sydney Carter.
Are we for sure using Acadience as the assessment for reading?
That's a really good question. Are we for sure using the Acadience as the assessment for reading? So no, the board rule changed. So this year the assessment is Acadience reading. I'm glad that came up because that is not for sure. Our RFP has closed. We're in the process of scoring the RFP for the benchmark reading assessment. We are for sure using the Acadience math assessment through the end of our contract, which is through June of 2026. Our contract currently ends in June of 24 for Acadience reading. And then we should know I think November is when we're probably going to have at least presented to the board, but I think it's announced earlier. We're planning on scoring the RFPs in a couple of weeks. So by the end of October, I think they announce an announcement of who we've selected as a vendor, and then we have to take that to our board for approval. But I think it's public after they make that announcement. So I think by the end of October, we should be able to announce the vendor for that assessment. The board rule language changed. It previously said Acadience reading, and now the language says the assessment selected by the board. So it may not be Acadience reading for math. It may be, we'll see in a couple of weeks, for reading, but for sure Acadience math for kindergarten. Okay, and then I think Jerry is going to talk through these slides.
Yeah, there's just a couple that I'll talk through, and then I'll turn it back to Sid, Teresa. If you could, Emily, if you could just go back one slide, please. There we go. I just want to point out we have included links to the Padlets for Acadience Math and Acadience Reading. Since I oversee math, I do want to call out for the Acadience Math Padlet. There was some resources I put in yesterday shared by Washington County School District on data analysis tools that they use. So thanks to Washington County. From what I saw in their presentation and use of these tools, they're pretty awesome. So those are there now on that Padlet. Okay, we can move on. We've included this checklist, and you'll notice this is where Teresa and I get some questions. And just to clarify, as Sid was trying to clarify as well. So we have the first 3 check marks are really for Acadience Math and Reading, but you have the last 3 required for reading, recommended for math. So that's just a clarification that we get questions about as far as requirements for math. So that's there. Math is a little more lenient at this point. Next slide. And then some essentials training. We've talked about training, and it's been brought up the importance of making sure those who are administering the assessments do that in the correct way. So we have reading and math. You'll notice there's a little discrepancy with math. I just want to call out for November 9th, even though it's under that title of math virtual training, the November 9th is in person. So as you're sharing the information, just note that. And there is a link there with more info if you want to look up for Acadience Math training. Okay.
All right. Progress monitoring. So there have been a lot of questions about progress monitoring this year, I think, as it's been highlighted more with the passing of SB 127 and the different requirements with progress monitoring and diagnostic assessments. We've had a few people reach out with some questions specific to progress monitoring. What does that look like? So we wanted to remind everybody that the progress monitoring should be done in alignment with the instruction that's being administered. So it should match that skill that you're instructing on. We've got a lot of questions about, should I administer the days to my whole class in 3rd grade? It's something that we're working on for progress monitoring. And our response is always no, because progress monitoring is based on the instruction or the intervention that that student is receiving. And then the progress monitoring materials are used to check to see how effective that instruction is going. So a lot of times when people are asking that, they want to use it as a practice test for students to practice with that assessment. That's not the use of progress monitoring materials. They're really meant to be a check-in to see, is your instruction or intervention effective for the student? The progress monitoring can be done out of grade level. So one of the things that we have posted here on our slide, but it's also available on our document that describes some diagnostic assessments that you may choose to use, as well as the coming up progress monitoring FAQs. They're all listed on the document. I'll post a link in just a minute as soon as I sit back down. But this recommendation for out of grade level progress monitoring comes from Acadience. It's also in our documents that we share. If you have a student that you want to see if your instruction is effective enough, you may want to use out of grade level materials because a student may be receiving instruction or intervention in a below grade level material. So this guideline kind of shows which grade should I be using, which grade level materials should I be using in my instruction with a student, and then how can I check that? So there's some recommendations for the percentage of students, their accuracy as well as their fluency, and that kind of helps to determine which level you may want to use with your instruction and with your progress monitoring. You go down the left-hand side, and then you want, as you're seeing if the instruction is effective, you go back up the right-hand side to see which level as you continue to make improvements or the student continues to make improvements. Okay, then we have a couple of the FAQs that are also posted in our document. I won't take a ton of time going through these, but these are specific examples of things that we get asked often. That's why they're on the FAQ. That's something in our early literacy document that we'll post in the chat just one second. But one of the big questions we get, especially as we're starting to require kindergarten assessments next year, if it's Acadience reading, is should we progress monitor letter naming fluency? And the answer is no. There's no progress monitoring materials available for letter naming fluency in kindergarten. That's a specific skill, but it's not an indicator of, or excuse me, it's not a specific skill, it's an indicator. That's why it's just a check on assessment, but not something that you would progress monitor because it's not a specific skill, it's just an indicator. So there's no progress monitoring forms. Instead, we recommend that teachers are teaching letter names with the sounds. And then once students have mastered that skill, what should we do? Either move on to the next skill that they haven't mastered yet or move into general tier 1 instruction. There's a few other FAQs on the next couple of pages. A question that we get often, so I wanted to address here, is can we use our own materials that go along with our own phonics programs or our own reading basals to progress monitor students? And the answer is yes, and. So you're welcome to use those materials, but you actually have to use the progress monitoring materials for our assessment, the benchmark reading assessment. So currently that's the Acadience reading assessment. You would need to use those materials at the rates that are recommended by the program. For a student that is well below benchmark, it's every 1 to 2 weeks you're using those materials. For a student that is below benchmark, it's every 2 to 4 weeks. So as long as you're following those guidelines with the currently Acadience reading materials, then you can still use, if you're saying, okay, I have a student that's well below and I'm using like Heggerty Phonics. And so I would 1 week use my progress monitoring materials from Heggerty, and then the next week I would use my Acadience reading progress monitoring materials. So I'm still meeting that every 2 weeks for a well below benchmark student. So it's you can, but what you need to do, you have to do to meet the rules are that you have to use the progress monitoring materials for this specific assessment. And then as Megan talked about, making sure that people who are administering the assessment are trained to administer the assessment. That includes progress monitoring. So make sure if you have people that are administering progress monitoring, they know and understand and are trained how to administer that assessment. This calendar just shows the one on the left would not be meeting the recommended rates of progress monitoring. The one on the right would. So a student that's yellow or below benchmark would need to be progress monitored at the rate of every 2 to 4 weeks. A student who is well below benchmark every 1 to 2 weeks. And then just a reminder that progress monitoring is there as a check to see how effective our instruction is. When you're looking at those aim lines, if you have more than 3 consecutive points of progress monitoring below that aim line, that's a signal that you should be adjusting the intensity of your instruction. You should be changing the instruction, doing something else. But more than 3 consecutive times below that aim line is an indicator that something should be switched up, that the student is not making progress at the rate that they should be doing. And then this was stated a little bit earlier, but one of the audit findings that we has been probably something that's a change from some of the communication that we may have had in the past, which Darren talked about earlier, was the reminder about how long we need to store the testing materials. That includes any of the paper materials. So for the PEEP or KEEP assessments, for the remainder of this year for KEEP, you would be, if you're administering that on paper, those would need to be kept for 3 years. If you're administering, like for Acadience reading, if you're using ADM as the platform and you administer paper pencil, or if you administer the DAYS assessment paper pencil, those would need to be stored for 3 years. For Acadience Math, any of the worksheets, so the computation worksheets for both parts for each measure of the year, so beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year,
If you have printed off the student booklets to record scores on, those are all materials that would be required to be stored for 3 years. So that may have been different than communication that we've shared in the past. We want to make sure we're very clear after the audit finding that that was something that was clarified for us as well. Any questions on storing materials and how long? All right, I think that of my slides.
All right, just some general RISE information to be aware of. First, our mid-year summative window has a go live of November 1st. It will be open through December 22nd, and then there's that closed moratorium before it will reopen again on January 2nd. Any tests that are started before March 1st do need to be completed by close of business or your end of your school day on March 1st. During this time, the benchmark modules are still available for teachers to use. And then our RISE administration for remote testing, just that component for remote testing, is going to be held on Monday, 10:30 to 11:30. You can sign up in Midas. I do understand, I know this is a quick turnaround, but we wanted to make sure that we had training provided for you before the window opened. And there's a lot of traveling that's happening the next 2 weeks with state personnel. So this is when we could do it. Just know if it doesn't work with your schedule, it is going to be recorded. It will be posted to the YouTube channel. We will also have members from our vendor, CAI, there to answer any questions or provide any clarification that you may have if you are participating in that online remote administration. And as a reminder, this is only provided for students who are receiving 100% of their instruction in the remote setting to begin with. One more piece of RISE information. We messaged a couple of weeks ago that there was an issue with non-participation codes in that it was defaulting to 209. That has now been fixed. So you can now go in without any issue to go in and put in your 204s if you already have some parental exclusions that have come in without having to then go redo them again because you'd already saved the default as 209. So you should be good to go there. When it comes to your tech, we were able to meet with the TCC groups a couple of weeks ago. So if you wear that hat, you've already had this information. If you do not wear that hat, just make sure that you're communicating with your tech people to disable auto updates. Just because if you are auto updating, you do run the risk of preventing students from accessing RISE because the secure browser is no longer compatible with what you have. Just as a note with that, there is a brand new secure browser that will be released for the new Mac OS system that was just rolled out. If you didn't update to that, you can still stay with the current secure browser. If you did update, this new secure browser is coming. It is not currently ready, but it is coming. We will continue to make all of these types of announcements through our AD memos as well as here in this meeting. And I've just linked the tech resources there if you need access to them.
Oh, okay, I get to wear my secondary hat. Megan Lopez here again. Secondary ELA hat now. I'm not going to go through all the information on this. I'm just putting in a plug for recruitment for Utah Aspire Plus development opportunities. I've sent out massive emails last week and this week, trying to recruit ELA grades 9 and 10 educators. So please share this information out. There is a link to apply for an opportunity to do this development. So go development. Please sign up.
Yeah, with these, with science too, we got an announcement out for high school teachers. And we'd love to get, especially from some of our charters, some new people. You know, that teacher that goes, this test doesn't teach what I teach. I'd love to have them at this writing workshop. They come there and they go, I'm here to fix this test on the first day. And then on the last day, they go, I had no idea. Wow, I need to change my instruction. So in my signature, there's a link where Jared and I send out announcements on a listserv, have them sign up, have them email me if you know someone that wants to be part of that workshop because we're collecting names now today. We also have some, I just found out a couple days ago, we're going to be developing a massive amount of science clusters for RISE. It's gonna be in December and January for grades 4 through 8. 125 is the plan. I need a lot of educators for that. So another reason to have your educators sign up on our listserv. ACT, I sent this out as a memo, but who your ACT district coordinator is important because they're going to be loaded up with the pre-user ID file by Maureen, who asked why she's important because she saves me a lot of stress. Because she's like, oh, this is easy. I'm like, I'm stressed. She's like, I got this. And I'm like, I'm not stressed. And so there's a link there. If you haven't sent out who that person is, it may be you. We may already know because you turned in that information. That's great. I had 19 people as of 5 minutes ago respond to that so far. Like, we know there's more of you out there. And I know there's more of you out there because we asked for org file information. Emily sent that out, and 26 charter schools in 12 districts have not responded to her. And we need that information quickly because I don't want to get Maureen stressed. She's going to be having to put those files together. We want to get them ready so that they're actually ready to go. This information is definitely, according to ACT, going to be ready to be uploaded by November 6th. We're asking them to get it to us early. I'm begging every week on the phone call with them, please let us have ACT now sooner so that on November 6th, we've already had it loaded, especially because November 7th is your training date on how to use that system. And we want to make sure that you can log into the system before the training. And so I'm hounding ACT like crazy, and we'll get that hopefully up and running for there. TestNav has an update. You got to let your schools know. You do not want to find out the day of ACT testing, right? TestNav has an update with ACT specifically. You need to get that update. There's a link here for that TestNav upgrade where it's there. If you don't upgrade it, that could cause some problems. So do be available. That is available. We have a link in there for the ACT Now webinar. You don't have to register for it. Just jump onto the webinar. And we had the people that did our training for the pilot are going to be the same people doing the training for the actual use of ACT Now. And those who were there at the pilot training, the feedback was pretty good, that there was pretty good training, even though even at that time, they couldn't open ACT Now pilot system. But pretty good training, and we'll record it regardless. So that's where we're at with that one. This just got unembargoed yesterday. ACT Now Utah graduate class data. This was kind of exciting because for the second year in a row out of similar schools, similar states like Utah that test over 90% of their juniors, Utah's on top of those states. We're number one, 2 years in a row. So, and if you saw the news yesterday in KSL, ACT scores around the nation dropped a big percent. Utah's went up 0.1%. So big congratulations to your schools, to your teachers, to the work they're doing to help those students out. There's some really interesting data in here. The one I like, 24% of graduates tested multiple times with an average score boosting from the 19.9 to 24. People who say ACT Now doesn't matter, that jump in score represents tens of millions of dollars in scholarships for our students. I can't sit still when people say ACT doesn't matter when you're talking about tens of millions of dollars just for Utah schools alone, for our students that go there. And the top 5 schools that students set their scores to are all in Utah. So I think for those students, thousands of dollars in their pocket made a difference and helped them out. So lots of registrations. You can see that I got it divided up because I hate those little thin hash marks when you look at the average scores, Utah versus national. There's a little slash in there, 43.6 thousand to 1.39 million total tested. And then the average scores across, including the composite score. So some really good information, some good data for Utah and ACT in terms of the grad data. We were pretty excited to get this a week ago last Tuesday. It was, it's just nice to see. So it's up there for you. You're some of the first people in the state to actually see this. So like I said, send that information. The one here, this is like I said about the states. This is comparison to the other states who have tested. Pretty much 90%, North Dakota 89, we'll let them slip in a little bit, but you can see an average composite score. My 0 got moved. We forgot to shift that one. We had a bunch of shifting in the Nearpod. My little circle was supposed to be on the 19.9. The percent meeting benchmark, those are the scores ACT uses. They correlate those to successful students in college. How likely are they to stay enrolled and not drop out? Right. And so those are those marks are going. And so those are our percent meeting those benchmarks, which across the board are higher than all the other states who, like Utah, test all the students, all the juniors. So just exciting, it's exciting news. We're happy to share that. Next slide, please. The highlights, over 90% of our students completed ACT. 19.9 is the average. 53 students scored perfect scores. And for those students at some of our universities, that's a full ride scholarship for 4 years, representing over $30,000 in scholarships each. That's pretty nice. So higher than each subsection by over 1 point compared to other states. On average, repeat testers outperform single testers by a margin of 6.3. And I want to emphasize this because that repeat testing doesn't necessarily have to happen with ACT, because we have programs like SHMOOP where students can take up to 5 tests a year to get that practice to help raise their individual scores. And so we flip to the next slide. Remember, right, this is the one about counselors, I think, next. Fee waivers. I'm going to be singing this loud and clear for curriculum directors and for our counselors. School counselors distribute these. It's distributed more last year than previous years, which was really nice. There's a link to the form the counselors have to use. It's really easy. Go online, say, I'm a counselor. I need this form, fill out the information, you get it. These fee waivers are not just, here's a fee waiver, take a free test. Free online tutorials for the test. 30 self-paced video lessons. Access to 2,000 ACT questions and answers. Take 5 full-length practice tests beforehand. Track your progress. Get 1 full year of access to all that. A free test release allowing you to receive another test copy they get the actual test back with the answers on that test release for free. They can get that if they have that waiver. There's a free report to the high schools, so you guys get the report, and then up to 6 colleges that they can report to on top of that. And then a lot of colleges have this thing where they will waive college application fees if you follow certain ACT guidelines. I don't know what it costs anymore. I was paying $95 to $125 and I was applying for colleges, and I'm getting pretty gray here. So it seems like it's got to be more nowadays. A fee waiver, I'll take that. To get these waivers, pretty much ACT is not looking over anyone's shoulder, but they do say, this is usually people who are like on free reduced lunch, have social economic lower status in some way or another. But there's no test, there's no litmus test, we're going to be double checking the student. They better have something to prove this. There's none of that. It's for the counselors to decide based on their conversations with the students. And if they feel the student qualifies for that waiver, hand it out. I'm sound like hand it out like crazy. An update on the pilot. We did uncover some issues with the pilot. ACT swears up and down we're not going to see those issues when we go live. We had a problem with automatic emails with confirmation of the organizational files. That was an issue. Thank you so much. Those who signed up for the first and second round of the pilot helped us uncover those issues. I've heard crickets since. But I go in and look at for my level, and I see a lot of you have added other users. A lot of you have added fake or mock students. A lot of you have done things in the system that tells me it seems to be working, because I think if you had a problem, you would have told me. If you have a problem, tell me. I really want to know about it. There's my email address. Thank you so much, everyone, for helping with that pilot. And if you haven't, you still got time to look in there and do stuff in there. Go right ahead, mess with it, try to break it. We're happy to have that happen. Other than that, any questions?
Couple things in the chat.
Cool.
Can you share a link where we can see where all states rank on ACT data?
I do not, not necessarily a link. I'm pretty sure I have a PDF I can send out to you. If you send me an email and you want that PDF,
Attached to the next email.
yeah, that's a great idea. I'll attach that with the XAD memo. There's a comprehensive report they sent out with the embargoed information that lists all that information, right?
And then how can I get this data for my graduating class of seniors?
In ACT Success, you have the option of doing either the state contract or all students, I believe. And so you should be able to drill down to that information, looking at the entire administration last year for all your students in the data.
If you just want the graduating class, you have to contact somebody there because I do it every year. I send an email to ACT.
Okay.
I've got her name somewhere.
Find out.
Find out for sure. We can put it in the memo because
I've asked for directions on doing it myself.
yeah,
and
because
they
I've
don't.
looked in there and I've been able to see there's a switch between the state contract and all students.
Yeah, you can do it that way, but if you're looking
But
for
if it's all-
just 12th graders and you want it for, yeah, it's just easier to.
For yourself, it's easier.
Contact them
Yep.
and they'll-
I found it pretty easy for myself to drill that, but I'm not looking for individual schools either. I'm just looking for the state as a whole. And I get it pretty quick and easy for the state as a whole
Yeah.
on that report and play around with that. But been playing around with that a lot lately, looking at all that information in the
If
data.
anybody needs it urgently, like you have a board meeting or something, have it, just email Scott.
Yeah, drop me an email. And and I'll figure out who the contact person is to contact if you want that specifically for your school or your district. And we can put that information in the memo. I'm happy to throw them under the bus to get a lot of emails. They need to do that work. It's okay.
And I'm thinking this is probably in reference to what you had first mentioned about missing like 12 districts and then a certain number of
Yeah,
charters.
charter schools for
Frankfurt just asked, are you sure you have the right contact information for the charters?
Yes.
yeah, we're pretty sure it's yeah.
Yes, Greg, we do.
Yeah. Knowing Emily and Maureen, I'm pretty confident, yes, that Emily knows what she's talking about. I have a lot of confidence there.
Okay, we're coming up on time. So just a reminder with ACT, they do have that hard deadline for accommodations. So make certain you're communicating that with appropriate personnel in your district. This is for your special education students, 504 and English learners. There's some resources from previous trainings. Next slide, Kim. Just remember to have that consent to release information on file that you keep at your school. It does not have to necessarily be personally signed by a parent, as long as there's a phone call with permission to share students' IEPs or 504 plans with ACT. That is sufficient. Just keep a record of that, however you choose in your LEA. And that deadline is January 19th. And then College Board also has a hard deadline in January. Next slide. And that is January 18th. So for our high school students, ensure that those are being completed as well.
Six out of 96 slides. Not something to be proud of, but we are through them. And hopefully much of this hopefully was review, just our efforts to try to make sure you're clear on what the most pressing needs for your time and attention are. But thank you for your time, for the support and the dialogue that we're able to have within our assessment community, and for the good work you do on behalf of our students. Have a wonderful day. Hopefully it's done raining outside.
So see.